Drawing on Leo Bersani's Is the Rectum a Grave and J.C. Whitehead's The Nuptial Deal, Same-Sex Marriage and Neoliberal Governance, in this presentation I will ask, do same-sex couples have an inalienable right to form families that are legally recognized? This question carries personal significance for me. As the daughter of lesbian parents, I have been interested in questions of rights to family formation and the politics of legal family recognition for same-sex couples for most of my life. Ultimately, I will argue that same-sex couples, and heterosexual couples for that matter, do not have an inalienable right to form families. However, same-sex couples do have a positive right to form families, and these families should be legally recognized. First, I will give background on the lesbian baby boom. After that, I will discuss the rights aspect of family formation, and finally I will dive into the legal recognition of family units. The lesbian baby boom refers to an increase in lesbian couples having children together as opposed to adopting or not having children at all that occurred in the United States in the 1990s. Insemination is the innovation credited with motivating the lesbian baby boom, which facilitated biological parenthood without requiring marriage or heterosexual intercourse. Within the course of this social movement, lesbian couples have had to confront the decisions of whether or not to have children, whether they will obtain sperm from an anonymous or known donor, whether they will use a sperm bank or will inseminate themselves at home, and how they will manage information about the sperm donor in relation to their family, friends, and child. Financial independence, technological advances, and the emergence of laws protecting second parent adoption can be seen as contributing to a rise in matrilineal, matrifocal families that constitutes the lesbian baby boom. It's also worth noting, interestingly, that the lesbian baby boom signifies a societal shift in the opposite direction proposed in Frederick Engel's The Origin of Family, Private Property, and the State that we read earlier this semester. In this piece, Engels describes society's shifts from matrifocal arrangements to patriarchal structures, coinciding with the rise of capitalism. And coincidentally, the lesbian baby boom moves society back in the direction of matrilineal families. Now I will discuss forming families. Any good Duke public health student will spew out the words of Duke alum Dr. Paul Farmer, the father of global health, when he said, "Health is a human right." But what does this mean in practice? In discussing rights, we can talk about inalienable rights, which, according to legaldictionary.net, are rights that supersede governmental laws and cultural norms. These natural rights include the right to think for oneself, the right to life, and the right to self-defense, and they remain through every human's lifetime. As reproduction and family formation do not fall under any of these categories, I argue that family formation is not an inalienable right for any married couple. However, I want to discuss the concepts of positive and negative rights here as well. So negative rights, simply put, are those that prevent interference with an individual. For example, a negative right could be the right to not be beaten or stolen from. Positive rights, on the other hand, put forth the claim that others must help you in some way. For example, many people pose the right to health care as a positive right because it relies on the provision of resources and services. So let's first consider two types of positive rights, and whether or not you agree that these are universal rights doesn't necessarily matter here. For now, let's just look at health and education. Positive rights in these contexts look different for different people. A sick person might need government-sponsored medication for their entire lives to manage a chronic illness to fulfill their right to health, while another person with a luckier health profile may not need any additional resources to fulfill this right. In the context of schooling, some students might need tutoring, help transporting themselves to school, and assistance in affording their books, while another person might need no external assistance to fulfill their right to education. Now let's consider family formation in the context of positive rights. Some couples might need access to sperm and reproductive technologies and medical care to form families, while others can conceive through routine heterosexual intercourse that would already be happening in their marriage anyway. So, for same-sex couples, family formation constitutes a positive right where sperm and potentially also reproductive technologies need to be provided, whereas for heterosexual couples, family formation constitutes a negative right, requiring only a lack of interference. Therefore, I argue that family formation for homosexual couples requires a positive right. Now that we've established that family formation for lesbian couples requires the provision of a positive right, let's be specific about what resources are necessary for the fulfillment of that right. Here I ask, what materials are involved in creating families for gay and lesbian couples? For gay couples, the reproductive labor by someone who can bear a child is required. For lesbian couples, access to sperm and potentially assisted reproductive technologies are required. Let's also consider how Leo Bersani's discussion of the AIDS epidemic relates to family formation by lesbian and gay couples. Bersani talks extensively about AIDS in his piece, but we often don't consider the aftershocks of the epidemic in terms of family politics and practicalities. Bersani states that AIDS was not only a medical crisis on an unparalleled scale, it involved a crisis of representation itself, a crisis over the entire framing of knowledge about the human body. And it turns out this crisis over the human body directly hindered the provision of the positive right for lesbian couples to have children and form families. In the 80s and 90s, the HIV/AIDS crisis sent shockwaves through the LGBTQ community. Not only were people dying at insanely high rates, but homosexual men were suddenly cast in a high-risk category as potential transmitters of disease. Notions of homosexuality and risk were exemplified by FDA guidelines that barred men who had sex with men from being sperm donors at sperm banks. Many women in the LGBTQ community, though, still wanted to use gay sperm donors. So thus far, I have argued that the lesbian baby boom required the provision of a positive right rather than an inalienable right for family formation. I have outlined what specific resources need to be provided for this right to be fulfilled, and have drawn the connection between the AIDS epidemic and family formation for lesbian couples. Now I will argue that the families of same-sex couples should be legally recognized. First, I want to acknowledge that the push for legal recognition of same-sex marriage is relatively new and was once seen as somewhat controversial within lesbian and gay communities. Campaigning for the legal recognition of same-sex marriage, according to Whitehead, can be viewed as conformity or radicalism. Whitehead sums up this controversy when asking, why did proponents of same-sex marriage work for inclusion in the marriage model rather than capitalizing on momentum from the 60s and 70s that was working towards deinstitutionalizing marital privilege in the law? Here, I will show why inclusion in the marriage model would be beneficial for same-sex families. Same-sex families should continue to be recognized through national legalization and normalization of same-sex marriage and second-parent adoption because of the practical and symbolic benefits for couples and their children that result from this legitimacy under the law. First, the practical benefits that come with a civil marriage license include issues of taxation, inheritance, medical directives, access to hospital visitation, legal standing to sue for wrongful death, eligibility for Social Security survivor benefits, the ability to claim spousal privilege in a court of law, and legal recognition of joint parenting. Additionally, children of same-sex couples may benefit if their family and their parents' marriage is legally recognized. This may reduce negative psychological effects of being seen as a deviant, abnormal, or marginalized family unit in the eyes of the law. Next, I will focus on the symbolic benefits of the legalization of same-sex marriage. The media in our country tends to focus on an imaginary white heterosexual family, which certainly exists, but does not solely reflect all family structures in the United States. Therefore, the power of symbolic representation via recognition of same-sex families under the law carries enormous weight for families that are marginalized from the public eye and national embrace. According to Whitehead, individuals marry and create legal families not because of a desire to conform to moralized discourses about health and well being, but because they are making a lifestyle decision and are seeking to fulfill themselves and gain personal happiness. Whitehead also contends that marriage is preferred because it ennobles its participants with the symbolic profit of normality. Thus, legal recognition of same sex marriage is symbolically powerful in that it allows for personal fulfillment, happiness, and a sense of the profits of normality. We have seen over and over this semester what the consequences of subordination and marginalization are. Knowing what we know at this point, we cannot discount these profits of normality, of being considered mainstream. In sum, same sex families should be legitimized via legalization of same sex marriage and second parent adoption. This legal recognition is compelling because it provides practical social and personal benefits to couples and their children, as well as symbolic benefits promoting the equality of different types of relationships and families in the public eye.